Washington, D.C. Friday, March the 28th, 2022, 2:45 p.m. The courtroom was seconds away from sealing the fate of an innocent woman. The prosecution was confident, the jury was convinced, and the judge was prepared to rule. Then, from the back of the gallery, a voice rang out, sharp, clear, and young. "Ma'am, he is framing you." Gasps filled the room. Heads turned. The gavel froze mid-air. This was not just a courtroom drama. This was the moment when a 12-year-old homeless boy, armed with nothing but his courage and the truth, stood up against a corrupt machine and changed everything. Meet Jalen Wright. Once arrested by the very agent now on trial, Jalen had every reason to stay silent. He had been overlooked, doubted, and dismissed his whole life. But when he recognized the real criminal hiding in plain sight, he could not hold back, because truth does not come from position, it comes from purpose. The agent on trial, FBI Special Agent Rachel Monroe, had once put cuffs on Jalen in a mistaken identity sweep. She later cleared him and even checked in on him once she realized he had no home to return to. But that one act of decency planted a seed. And now, as she stood accused of criminal conspiracy, framed by one of her own colleagues, it was Jalen who refused to let her fall alone. What unfolded next would stun the courtroom, the city, and eventually the nation. A corrupt jury, a silent courtroom, a loud truth. This is not just about justice, this is about redemption, bravery, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest voice is the one that carries the weight of real change. Comment: Courage can save lives. If you're ready to witness how one sentence rewrote the ending of a rigged case. Because when Jalen spoke up, the system was forced to listen. Jalen Wright had already lived through more than most kids his age. At just 12 years old, he called a downtown shelter in Washington, D.C., his home. His parents had died in a car crash 2 years earlier, leaving him without family, without a safety net, and without much more than a small backpack and a memory that never let go of details. He was quiet, observant, and unnoticed. But what people did not see was that Jalen noticed everything. One cold night, while trying to sleep behind a diner, Jalen overheard voices. He sat up and peeked through the cracked dumpster lid. 2 men, dressed too clean for the alley, stood beneath a flickering streetlight. One handed the other a thick envelope. The other man passed over a folder. No names, no words above a whisper. But Jalen saw their faces, memorized their shoes, and caught a glimpse of the license plate as the car pulled away. He thought nothing of it until 3 days later. Sitting on the floor of the shelter, watching the old TV in the corner, he saw one of the men from the alley on screen. He was testifying in court, and not just any court. He was the key witness in a case against FBI Special Agent Claire Monroe. Jalen froze. Claire Monroe, the woman who had arrested him for loitering outside a federal building months earlier. She had treated him with cold efficiency, no softness, no conversation, just handcuffs and silence. But she had not been cruel, and days after the arrest she returned, not to punish, but to release, to admit a mistake. That stuck with Jalen, because adults did not usually admit when they were wrong. Now she was the one in handcuffs. Now she was the one everyone believed was guilty. "She treated me like I didn't matter," Jalen whispered to himself. "But she's not dirty." He remembered the man from the alley, the envelope, the glance over his shoulder. It clicked. Jalen had a choice. He could stay quiet, hide, keep his head down and hope the system never noticed him again, or he could speak. Speak up for the woman who once judged him. speak up against the man now calling her corrupt. Speak the truth, even if no one wanted to hear it from a kid like him. He chose courage. Comment brain. If you believe sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. Because Jalen Wright saw what others missed and refused to stay silent. Agent Claire Monroe sat motionless at the defense table, her hands clenched tightly in front of her. The courtroom buzzed with finality. The prosecution had wrapped up their argument. The jury seemed firmly convinced, and Judge Rollins adjusted his glasses with the weight of sentencing heavy in the air. "The evidence is overwhelming," the prosecutor declared, voice booming with authority. "We ask for immediate sentencing." Judge Rollins gave a slow nod. "Agent Monroe, any final words before judgment is passed?" Before she could open her mouth, the courtroom doors burst open. Jalen Wright, breathless and wide-eyed, ran through the aisle. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Ma'am, he is framing you. I saw him. I saw everything." Gasps scattered across the room like falling glass. Every head turned. Jalen pointed straight at the prosecution's star witness, a man named Martin Keene. The very man who had given detailed, confident testimony against Agent Monroe. He paid someone behind Silver's diner. I was there. He gave him an envelope and took a folder. I saw it all. The courtroom broke into chaos. "Order!" Judge Rollins shouted, slamming the gavel. "Who is this boy?" Agent Monroe stared in disbelief. "That's the boy I arrested months ago. What is he doing here?" Jalen stood firm, breathing hard. "I know, I'm just a kid. And I know you don't believe people like me. But I remember his face. I remember his shoes. And I remember what I saw." Martin Keene turned pale. The room fell into a stunned silence. Judge Rollins looked between Jalen, Monroe, and Keene. "Bailiff," he said, voice calm but firm, "remove the jury. This court will enter emergency review." Jalen didn't move. He just looked at Monroe and nodded. She looked back, eyes wide with something between shock and gratitude. Comment. Let him speak. If you believe every voice deserves to be heard, no matter their past. Because when Jalen interrupted the courtroom, he did more than speak up. He cracked open the truth. Jalen Wright sat nervously in the witness chair, legs swinging slightly as the courtroom stared. A bailiff handed him a Bible, and he swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. His voice trembled, but his eyes never wavered. He looked directly at the judge. "The man on the stand met someone behind Silver's diner," Jalen said, pointing toward Martin Keene, the prosecution's star witness. He gave him a black folder and said, "She won't know what hit her." A murmur moved through the gallery. The prosecutor rolled his eyes and scoffed. "Your Honor, this is hearsay from a homeless child with no record of credibility." But Monroe's defense attorney stood up calmly, holding a remote in hand. "Actually, Your Honor, we pulled security footage from a gas station across the alley." He clicked the remote. A monitor flickered on. Boom. Grainy but clear footage showed Martin Keene behind Silver's diner. He exchanged a folder with an unidentified man. The timestamp matched the night Jalen described. The angle even caught a partial license plate. Enough for verification. Gasps spread across the courtroom. Keene turned in his seat, visibly shaken. "Truth comes in many forms," the defense attorney added. "Sometimes it walks in when you least expect it." Judge Rollins leaned forward, gripping the edge of the bench. His gaze locked on Keene, then shifted to Jalen. "Young man, your testimony just changed the direction of this entire case." In less than an hour, the trial unraveled. The prosecution requested a recess. The media outside exploded with headlines. What was once an open and shut case against an FBI agent had turned into a firestorm of corruption. Comment, thumbs up, if you believe truth comes from the most unexpected places. Because Jalen didn't just remember, he revealed. The courtroom atmosphere was electric. The video footage had shaken the prosecution's foundation, but what came next detonated the entire case. Martin Keene, the star witness, sat hunched in the stand, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. The judge had just ordered a direct inquiry. Under oath and intense questioning, the pressure cracked him wide open. They threatened me. I had no choice, Keene stammered, voice barely above a whisper. Gasps swept through the courtroom. The prosecutor paled. Monroe's defense attorney stood stone-faced as the unraveling began. Keene confessed that he had been coerced into testifying falsely against Agent Monroe, but that was only the beginning. Within hours, a deeper investigation was launched by federal authorities present in the courtroom. What emerged was a conspiracy far greater than a single corrupt witness. 2 jurors had been bribed. 3 critical documents submitted as evidence had been forged. A small but powerful internal corruption ring had been operating beneath the surface, one that had now been exposed, all thanks to the courage of a 12-year-old boy. Judge Rollins, face flushed with disbelief and fury, slammed his gavel with a thunderous crack. All charges against Agent Claire Monroe are dropped. An investigation will be launched immediately into all parties involved. This court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to file breaking news. The jury was dismissed. And at the center of it all, Jalen stood still. Agent Monroe turned slowly to him. Her voice was quiet, almost disbelieving. "Why would you help me? After everything?" Jalen looked up, his eyes steady. "Because I know what it's like to not be believed. And no one deserves that." Tears welled in Monroe's eyes. Comment, "Justice wins," if you felt chills hearing Jalen speak truth to power. Because the fight for justice is not about age or status. It is about courage. In the days following the courtroom bombshell, the fallout was swift and far-reaching. The FBI launched a full internal review, uncovering layers of misconduct that had long been buried beneath false loyalty and silence. At a nationally televised press conference, the Bureau made a rare acknowledgement. Standing before a wall of cameras, the FBI director paused, then said clearly, "We thank Jalen Wright for his courage. Because of him, a serious breach in justice was stopped." Jalen stood quietly off to the side, dressed in a shirt too big and shoes a little worn, but with a presence that could not be ignored. Agent Claire Monroe, now exonerated, requested that she be placed in charge of Jalen's case. "He saved my life," she said to the review board. "The least I can do is help him live his." After weeks of hearings, paperwork, and psychological evaluations, Monroe was granted temporary guardianship of Jalen. With his consent, she opened her home to him, beginning a new chapter neither of them had seen coming. It was not a fairy tale, but it was real. Jalen moved into Monroe's modest townhouse just outside the city. He got his own room, the first he'd had in years. Posters of athletes and comic book heroes lined the walls. A sketch pad sat on the desk, always open. Dinners were quiet at first. Monroe was careful not to overstep. Jalen was cautious not to let his guard down. But something unspoken grew between them, a mutual understanding forged in truth and redemption. "We're not friends yet," Jalen said one night over spaghetti, "but we're not enemies anymore." Monroe smiled. "Fair enough. They went grocery shopping together. She helped him register at a new school. He taught her how to use a popular sketch app. And gradually, trust began to replace trauma. Jalen's story became a symbol of how even the most broken stories could find healing. Not perfection, not quick fixes, but healing through truth and effort and time. Comment heart eyes if you believe even broken stories can find healing. Because sometimes courage writes the first line of a brand new chapter. Months after the courtroom collapse and the formation of an unexpected new home, Jalen Wright stood under the bright lights of a national youth leadership stage. The room was full of dignitaries, students, community leaders, and families. He had been chosen to receive the National Courage Youth Award. Wearing a clean blazer, the sleeves still a little long, Jalen stepped up to the podium. Behind him stood Claire Monroe, hands folded, her eyes already brimming with emotion. The applause faded. The room quieted. Jalen took a breath. "I didn't save an agent," he began, his voice steady but sincere. "I saved someone who deserved a second chance, just like I did." There was no flourish, no grand statement, just truth, clear and humbling. He looked out into the crowd and continued, "People thought I didn't matter, that I was just a kid with no future. But someone gave me a reason to speak up. And I realized that second chances aren't gifts, they're decisions. I made mine." He paused, then glanced back at Monroe. She stepped forward and gently took his hand. The entire auditorium rose to its feet. Applause echoed across the room. Some wiped tears. Others clapped until their hands ached. It was a single image that would circulate across headlines and timelines. A boy once written off by the system holding hands with the woman once accused by it. A picture of trust, redemption, and the power of courageous connection. Comment: Jalen is a hero if you believe in second chances and brave hearts. Because in the end, real heroes are not always the ones in capes. They're the ones who speak when silence feels safer. What started with a desperate shout in a courtroom has now grown into something few could have imagined. Jalen Wright and Agent Claire Monroe, once on opposite sides of the law, now stand side by side as allies. Together, they travel the country speaking at youth justice events, court reform panels, and school assemblies. Their message is simple but powerful. Truth matters. Empathy saves. And every child deserves to be heard. Jalen, now 13, uses his experience to advocate for better treatment of juvenile witnesses in the justice system. His story helped spark a national review of courtroom protocols involving minors. As a result, several states have introduced new policies ensuring young witnesses are given advocates, not interrogations. Just because we're kids, Jalen says, doesn't mean we don't know what we see. Monroe, once nearly condemned by her own agency, now leads training workshops within federal law enforcement on how to recognize systemic bias and rebuild trust with marginalized communities. Their story, a former agent and a once homeless boy, has become a national case study in redemption, change, and the unexpected bonds that can emerge from broken systems. It began with confrontation. It ended with connection. Comment: I still believe, if you know that hope can rise from the hardest places. For more stories that will shake your soul and restore your hope, watch our next video. Black girl interrupted the judge. My stepfather is lying. Her revelation shocked everyone. Boy walks into courtroom, points at the mayor. What he says shocks the city. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next moment where truth takes the stand. Share this story. Someone out there needs to hear that. Even in chaos, courage lives. Explosion.